Let's be honest, we're only at the very beginning of the Epstein files story. The documents that have already been released will take months, if not years, to fully analyze. But even now, one thing is clear. The story of Jeffrey Epstein, a millionaire pedophile whose sexual network ensnared members of the global elite, is no longer seen as just a criminal case. Increasingly, it feels like something much darker. After the US Department of Justice released millions of pages of documents, a question that until recently sounded like a conspiracy theory is now being asked out loud. Was Epstein an intelligence asset? And a second, equally uncomfortable question follows. Could he have been an asset of Russian intelligence? These suspicions are growing louder. In newly declassified materials, the name Vladimir Putin appears more than 1,000 times, while the word Russia appears nearly 5,900 times. In a classified FBI memo from 2017, Epstein is explicitly described as someone who managed assets tied to Putin. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has now publicly announced the launch of an investigation, stating that there are grounds to suspect that this unprecedented pedophilia scandal may have been partly orchestrated by Russian intelligence services. The resemblance to classic KGB and later FSB methods is hard to ignore. Before we dive deeper, let's clearly separate facts from noise. The Epstein files contain a lot of material that isn't particularly useful. Emails where Epstein shares opinions, speculates, or exchanges casual messages. Those are not facts, just his views. Many sensational headlines are built precisely on that kind of content. I'm also not going to dwell on the many genuinely horrifying emails and testimonies. You've already read about them everywhere, and you've seen countless videos on the topic. That coverage will continue for months, maybe years. What interests me most is the potential Russian connection. Because if you run a pedophile island, where everything is photographed and filmed, you inevitably accumulate enormous amounts of kompromat, blackmail material, on some of the most powerful people in the world. The real question is, who controls that kompromat, and how is it being used? Here's how we'll proceed. First, I'll briefly outline what we know so far. Then we'll look at the long-standing practice of honey traps in the USSR and modern Russia. And only after that will we draw broader conclusions. What do we know right now? Epstein had financial ties to Russia, including transactions routed through multiple banks. Money was transferred from Epstein-linked accounts to Russian recipients, including models. According to US Senator Ron Wyden, Treasury Department files document 4,725 wire transfers totaling nearly $1.1 billion sent from a single account through several Russian banks, some of them under sanctions, linked to payments associated with human trafficking for sexual exploitation. These are massive sums. Transactions of this scale do not move unnoticed by financial intelligence agencies. If they were hidden, it means someone very powerful wanted them hidden. Epstein also supplied Western VIPs, politicians, billionaires, influential figures, with women from Russia and the post-Soviet space. His own correspondence confirms this. In other words, he deliberately created situations that were ideal for blackmail. Russian women and powerful Western men, a textbook setup for kompromat, especially after 2016, when fears of Russian interference sharply increased. Several people in Epstein's inner circle had direct or indirect ties to Russia. We'll talk later about figures like Belarusian-born Shulyak. Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's closest associate, was the daughter of Robert Maxwell, a man with notoriously murky ties to Israeli and Soviet intelligence services, as reported by the Daily Mail. Even without Maxwell, there's Maria Drozgova, a direct personal link between Russian circles and Epstein. Russian officials also showed a clear interest in the Epstein affair. Deputy Minister of Economic Development Belyakov was reportedly involved. And notably, in June 2018, just 3 weeks before the Putin-Trump summit in Helsinki, Epstein attempted to send messages to the Kremlin through intermediaries. In one email to Thorbjørn Jagland, former Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Epstein asked him to pass a message to Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, hinting that Epstein had important information for Putin. Judging by the response, that message was delivered. In the same correspondence, Epstein bragged about his understanding of Donald Trump and even offered advice on how to negotiate with the US president. In other words, he was consciously building a communication channel to the Kremlin via European intermediaries. Why? Perhaps he was offering himself as an influence consultant on American elites, or perhaps as a holder of kompromat that could be useful to the Kremlin. Not coincidentally, his emails also mention that Ambassador Vitaly Churkin understood Trump after our conversations. Epstein had direct correspondence with Churkin, Russia's late UN ambassador. This suggests something important. Epstein was familiar with Russian diplomats, shared insights with them, and was apparently willing to help Russia exert influence over the United States. But to understand whether the hypothesis, that kompromat from Epstein's island, could have reached Putin's desk, has real weight, we need context. And that context is crucial. Sexual blackmail is a long-standing tool of Russian intelligence. The idea of a Russian trail in the Epstein case didn't come out of nowhere. Sexual kompromat has been a favorite weapon of the KGB and later the FSB for decades. From classic Soviet-style honey traps to modern, highly sophisticated operations, the Kremlin has turned sexual blackmail into a geopolitical instrument. If Epstein truly ran something resembling an elite brothel with covert video surveillance, and by now that seems extremely likely, the key question becomes, who had access to those recordings? Who might have been operating behind the scenes of this theater of corruption? To answer that, we need to trace the Epstein scandal alongside the well-documented practices of Russian intelligence. Let's start with the basics, the honey trap. The method is simple. Create an intimate, compromising situation and secretly record it, then use it to control the target. The KGB perfected this system. They even had specially trained female agents known as swallows. During the Cold War, these operatives seduced Western diplomats and officials, luring them into apartments equipped with hidden cameras, so-called swallow nests. The resulting tapes destroyed careers and turned targets into assets. Famous cases include British official John Vassell and French ambassador Maurice Dejean, both compromised by KGB-orchestrated sexual operations. And that's only what we know. The real system was far broader. It didn't disappear with the collapse of the Soviet Union. It evolved. In post-Soviet Russia, kompromat became a universal currency of power. A well-known example is the 1999 scandal involving Prosecutor General Yuri Skuratov. State television suddenly aired a video of a man resembling Skuratov with prostitutes. And who confirmed the authenticity of the tape? Vladimir Putin, then director of the FSB. The corruption investigation Skuratov was leading was buried. Putin, meanwhile, demonstrated loyalty to the Yeltsin family and soon rose to power. The message was unmistakable. No one is safe. Everyone has skeletons. The security services know them all. Since then, sexual blackmail techniques have only intensified, and the targets weren't just foreign visitors. They included domestic opponents. A striking example is the scandal involving Ekaterina Gerasimova, nicknamed Mumu. A young model, she became the centerpiece of a series of provocations. She befriended journalists and opposition figures, entered into intimate relationships with them, while hidden cameras recorded everything. In the spring of 2010, multiple sex tapes were leaked online. Among those exposed were nationalist Alexander Belov, Potkin, publicist Viktor Shenderovich, and several prominent editors and Kremlin critics. Dozens of journalists and politicians were publicly humiliated. Later, it emerged that Mumu worked through a modeling agency. Opposition figure Ilya Yashin later said she tried to lure him as well, offering even cocaine, but he refused. His footage was reportedly kept in reserve for years before being released much later. It didn't work particularly well. There was nothing illegal or scandalous. A young unmarried man sleeping with a woman isn't much of a revelation. After the leaks, Gerasimova disappeared, deleted her social media, left the country, and avoided the press. Who was behind the operation? Russian security services. Names like Vasily Yakimenko, head of the pro-Kremlin youth movement Nashi, were mentioned. The Prosecutor General's office nominally tried to investigate, but no criminal case was ever opened. Officially, no one was punished. Unofficially, the goal was achieved. Independent journalists and opposition figures were publicly discredited. Years later, the story inspired a feature film. Her Name Was Mumu, which portrays how cynically the state uses sex traps and how disposable even the bait becomes. It's fiction, but closely based on real events. There are no heroes in this game, no clean rules, just power, manipulation, and control. When the trap snaps shut, reputations are destroyed, or at the very least badly damaged. In intelligence slang, this tactic has a name: a honey trap. Sexual kompromat has long been a trademark of Russian intelligence and the propaganda machine, but these methods are used not only against political opponents. Over time, they have evolved and become commercialized. If certain cases were one-off operations targeting specific individuals, in Putin's Russia, sex traps have effectively turned into a full-fledged service industry for the elite. It sounds extreme, but there is substantial evidence that the system of power itself organized the recruitment and monitoring of young women to meet the needs of high-ranking clients. Don't believe it? Let's look at the investigation. In 2021, Radio Free Europe/Radio Liberty exposed a secretive private clinic in St. Petersburg known as Sogaz, linked to Putin's eldest daughter, Maria Vorontsova. Officially, it was a VIP medical center for insiders only. Patients included people close to Putin, generals from the Federal Protective Service, and even Federation Council Speaker Valentina Matvienko, the very top of Russia's ruling elite. But behind closed doors, doctors at the clinic were performing far more unusual tasks. Investigators discovered that so-called athletes, young women with model looks, were regularly undergoing medical examinations there. Clinic staff referred to them as a special category. These women were constantly monitored by gynecologists, tested for HIV, syphilis, hepatitis, and other infections. Some even provided certificates confirming virginity, requested by particularly demanding clients willing to pay large sums for such services. It sounded like an elite escort operation, and that's exactly what it was. A source inside the clinic confirmed that these athletes were in fact high-end escorts catering to wealthy and influential clients. Crucially, all of this operated under the protection of the state system itself. The clinic was originally owned by structures linked to oligarch Yuri Kovalchuk, a close friend of Putin, and later came under the control of a company in which Maria Vorontsova was listed as a co-owner. That means the Russian president's daughter was directly involved in a medical center where, alongside legitimate treatment, records were secretly kept on women from escort agencies. This wasn't accidental. Vorontsova is a medical doctor by training, and in 2019 oversaw the construction of a massive private medical complex costing over 40 billion rubles, designed to serve Russia's elite. And it served them thoroughly. The Anti-Corruption Foundation later confirmed these findings. The clinic monitored the health of elite prostitutes, so powerful clients could feel safe from infections. The women underwent regular checkups, tests, and fitness monitoring, fully prepared to meet VIP demands. Some clients, self-proclaimed defenders of traditional values, even demanded virgins. The clinic accommodated those requests too, for an additional fee. According to The Insider, one regular client of these athletes was Yevgeny Prigozhin, founder of the Wagner Group, and at the time a close ally of Putin. The circle closes neatly. People from Putin's inner circle regularly used the services of vetted escorts, whose health was supervised by a clinic tied to Putin's family, generating substantial income for that same family. Estimates suggest Vorontsova earned hundreds of millions of rubles annually from the clinic's operations. At this point, it's no longer just about kompromat. It's a way of life for the ruling caste. Women become a resource, just like yachts, villas, and offshore accounts. One man wants a mistress, another an Olympic champion, another a model with a certificate of virginity. Everything on demand. Naturally, controlling information about who met whom and when creates enormous blackmail potential. Every high-ranking client becomes vulnerable. Their private lives are documented, and by structures closely linked to the security services and Putin himself. This isn't theory. The investigative film by the Katkinsad Project details how Russian security services drugged and recruited young people, including cases involving pedophiles. With extensive evidence and testimony from victims, it shows how these schemes operate and the role played by the FSB. It's a disturbing but revealing document of modern Russia. Honey traps there are no longer isolated operations. They're an entire industry woven into the vertical of power. Some cases show targeted operations against specific individuals, while others, like the Vorontsova clinic, reveal systemic control over the intimate lives of the elite. And sometimes these scandals explode at the intersection of politics, business, and international attention. One such case erupted in 2018. Think about it. A wealthy man surrounds himself with young women, invites influential guests, provides them with sexual services, and creates a situation that can later be used against everyone involved, the guest and the host alike. In Deripaska's case, it all spilled into the open. But how many similar yacht parties never made it into the headlines? That remains an open question. It's no secret that many Russian oligarchs keep entourages of models, that officials are happy to vacation at someone else's expense with beautiful women, and that every such arrangement creates potential kompromat. Somewhere in the archives, perhaps on Lubyanka or in some other secure repository, there may well be dusty folders filled with photos, videos, and testimony on almost everyone. Women like Nastya Rybka don't just appear around powerful men by accident. And this brings us to the key point. If inside Russia sexual kompromat has long been a routine tool of control and blackmail, why wouldn't similar methods be used abroad, especially when a case like Jeffrey Epstein presents itself? A scandal unprecedented in scale, involving princes, presidents, billionaires, and scientists. Let's examine Epstein's connections to Russia. They turn out to be far deeper than many assumed. A picture begins to emerge suggesting that Epstein was not acting alone. He may have had powerful patrons or partners. Jeffrey Epstein became infamous for running what was effectively a harem on his mansions and private Caribbean island, including underage girls. For decades, he recruited young women, some as young as 14 or 15, under the guise of massage work, and offered them for sexual access to his wealthy and influential friends. His guest list included major businessmen, government officials, politicians, and scientists, the cream of Western elites. Ironically, the one person reportedly not welcome was Elon Musk. There are messages showing Musk asking to visit Epstein's island, only for Epstein to decline. When the truth finally began to surface, it hit like a thunderclap. Epstein was arrested in 2019 on charges of sex trafficking and abuse of minors. He never made it to trial, officially dying by suicide in his jail cell. Many, including myself, believe he was killed. In August 2019, he took his secrets with him. But not everything disappeared. Documents, emails, recordings, and victim testimony remain. And what has emerged from these materials, some released earlier, some more recently, is striking. A clear Eastern European, specifically Russian, footprint runs through Epstein's operation. First, Epstein's network of recruiters included people from the former Soviet Union. His files mention Russian modeling agencies used to recruit girls. One notable figure is Maria Drozdova, a former activist in the pro-Kremlin youth movement Nashi, the same woman who once became famous for publicly kissing Vladimir Putin at the Seliger Youth Forum. Years later, she ended up working for Epstein in the United States. A person with direct Kremlin connections found herself in Epstein's inner circle, effectively running his public relations. Analysts suggest her startup may have been used to gain access to Silicon Valley technology, but even her mere presence alongside Epstein is telling. Is this not a potential channel of influence? In March 2017, Drozdova was recommended to Epstein as an exceptionally successful young woman eager to meet him and present her plan to conquer the world. In July 2017, they discussed shaping Epstein's public image. She sent him PR questionnaires, asking which women he had positive professional relationships with and which public figures might give favorable media endorsements. In one email, she suggested filmmakers who could produce either a documentary or a feature film about Epstein, including Liza Berker-Pedersen, who had previously directed Putin's Kiss, a film about Drozdova herself. She also proposed creating an anti-harassment foundation, writing, "You will gain access to a large pool of ambitious women. You can recommend the best of them to your business partners, or even hire them yourself." Other correspondence shows that Drozdova organized Epstein's meetings with journalists. Second, Epstein actively supplied Russian and Eastern European women to his powerful Western associates. there are concrete examples. In August 2010, he emailed Prince Andrew offering to arrange a dinner with a 26-year-old Russian woman, smart, beautiful, and reliable. Andrew replied that he would be happy to meet her. In 2012, someone wrote to Epstein, "I have 2 Russian girls, 21 and 24, who want to meet you." In 2013, American businessman Steve Tisch discussed with Epstein meetings with Ukrainian and Russian women Epstein had introduced to him. In other words, Epstein deliberately provided Western VIPs with women from Russia and former Soviet states. Third, a key figure in Epstein's later years was his final partner, Karina Shulyak, originally from Belarus. She entered his life around 2009 and stayed until the very end. Shortly before his death, Epstein transferred a substantial portion of his assets to her, including his private island. She was the last person he called from jail, telling guards he was calling his mother. Here I'll briefly step into speculation. It's possible he was asking her to reach out to contacts in Russian security services to help extract him from prison. I can't prove this, but what we do know is that Shulyak became a major beneficiary of his will, receiving $50 million, 5 times more than Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's longtime associate. Why such generosity? Payment for silence, perhaps? Shulyak is a citizen of Belarus, a satellite state of Russia. We can only guess what connections she may have had to local or Russian security services. But it's a fact that Epstein trusted her more than anyone else. He financed her family and bought a home for her parents in Minsk. Whether she was an intermediary, a handler, or simply a well-placed adventurer, her role is far too significant to be dismissed as accidental. Finally, there is a direct link between Epstein and a man connected to the FSB. That man is Sergei Belyakov, a graduate of the FSB Academy and a high-ranking Russian official. After Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, he headed the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Before that, he served as an advisor to Oleg Deripaska, the same oligarch involved in Rybkagate. Epstein and Belyakov corresponded, and their emails are revealing. In July 2015, Epstein wrote to Belyakov, "There is a Russian woman from Moscow, Guzel Ganyeva. She is trying to blackmail a group of influential businessmen in New York. This is bad for everyone." Ganyeva was indeed a model who accused American billionaire Leon Black, an Epstein associate, of misconduct. 3 days later, Belyakov sent Epstein a full dossier on the woman, her income, vulnerabilities, and how to handle her. In effect, a man with FSB ties helped Epstein resolve a blackmail problem by rapidly producing a complete profile. In return, Epstein advised Belyakov on how to bypass US sanctions, including the use of cryptocurrencies. This is not rumor. These details come from published correspondence analyzed by investigative researchers. What emerges is a symbiotic relationship. Epstein and a Russian state official with an FSB background exchanging favors. A partnership. Epstein shared know-how on bypassing Western restrictions. Russia, in simple terms, helped resolve issues involving women. That alone helps explain why today so many countries, especially those geographically close to Russia, and particularly Ukrainian experts, are sounding the alarm about a possible Moscow connection to Epstein's empire. Here's how I see it. It's unlikely that Epstein's operation was originally a Russian intelligence project from the very beginning. But there were countless moments when Russian security services could have entered the picture, at the level of individual women supplied to Epstein, some of whom could have functioned as classic honey traps, at the level of agencies and intermediaries supplying those women, and possibly through direct arrangements between Epstein himself and representatives of the FSB or affiliated structures in exchange for specific services. We can see from Epstein's own emails that he actively sought ties with Russia, and it's hard to imagine the Kremlin passing up such an opportunity. That's why I assess the probability that compromising material from Epstein's island is stored somewhere on Lubyanka as very high, regardless of whether this was a direct FSB operation or whether the transfer happened through embedded agents and intermediaries. At present, there is no hard proof that Epstein worked under the direction of or in formal partnership with Russian intelligence, and there may never be. Too many powerful people are implicated. It's entirely possible that Epstein was a lone operator who simply sold information to anyone willing to pay, Moscow, Mossad, or others. But that's not the most important point. What matters is that Russia had both the motive and the opportunity to exploit Epstein's network. First, kompromat is a traditional instrument of Kremlin power, as we've discussed at length. Second, from the mid-2000s onward, Putin had a powerful incentive to seek leverage over Western leaders. After sanctions and international isolation, the Kremlin was actively searching for pressure points. And here was a ready-made tool: Epstein's address book, his recordings, and dozens of influential names, people who would have every reason to panic if their involvement with underage girls became public. It would have been foolish not to try to obtain those cards. Jokes about Agent Krasnov no longer sound entirely like jokes. Based on correspondence, Trump clearly had direct ties to Epstein. He denies ever being on the island, but Trump denies many things. His life is filled with accusations of sexual misconduct from various women, many of which were settled financially. So it cannot be ruled out that Putin may indeed possess compromising material on a sitting or former US president. That said, there's an important caveat. In today's world, classic kompromat doesn't always work the way it used to. Trump's supporters simply don't care what their leader did. We've already seen this play out. When you assemble all the fragments, the picture that emerges is both fascinating and terrifying. Russia is a country where intimacy and power are deeply intertwined, where young women are turned into instruments of influence, sex into a currency for bribes and blackmail, including cases involving minors. We've seen this in domestic investigations, journalists destroyed, escort networks controlled through Kremlin-linked clinics, senior officials relaxing with young women on oligarchs' yachts. We also see hints of how this machine operates beyond Russia's borders. The swallows fly west, ending up in the bedrooms of princes and congressmen. Remember Maria Butina, who was quite literally placed in proximity to American officials. That case is known in detail precisely because it failed, because she was caught. The Epstein case may represent the pinnacle of this phenomenon, a global honey trap set for the world's elite, or a ready-made trap that Russian intelligence later captured and integrated into its own toolkit. Many details remain shrouded in darkness. It may take years before the full truth emerges, if it ever does. But even now, the number of coincidences is simply too large to dismiss as coincidence. Epstein maintained ties with Russian businessmen and officials. He recruited women from areas within Russia's sphere of influence. Figures connected to the Kremlin circulated within his orbit. And the modus operandi itself, hidden cameras, a private island, lavish hospitality for the world's powerful, reads like something straight out of a KGB manual. The Kremlin didn't invent sexual blackmail, but it elevated it to an art form and effectively to a state policy. Why wouldn't it integrate its methods into a structure as perfectly suited as Epstein's empire, especially when Epstein himself appeared eager for that cooperation? Perhaps new evidence will surface, tapes, testimony, intelligence archives. But even what we already know outlines a deeply disturbing scenario. If these assumptions are correct, then Western leaders who visited the hospitable Mr. Epstein were left vulnerable to Kremlin pressure, and that becomes a matter of national security. It's no surprise that Poland, a country with first-hand experience of KGB methods, reacted quickly and seriously to the Epstein revelations. In the Baltic states, in Ukraine, everywhere people understand the value of Russian kompromat, there are calls to treat this as a real threat, because kompromat doesn't rust. A recording can lie dormant for years, waiting for its moment, until suddenly it's pulled out, weaponized, and deployed. Often, such material is useless once published. Its true power lies in remaining unpublished. The modern world captures this shift well. Watch The Boys. It once felt grotesque and exaggerated. With each passing day, it looks more like a documentary, minus the superheroes. And finally, the bitterest conclusion of all. In these intelligence games, the most important thing is often lost: the lives of the victims. Young girls dragged into hell, prostitution, rape, blackmail, reduced to pawns for some, expendable material for others. Russian and American authorities alike failed these girls by allowing such systems to exist. Epstein avoided punishment for years. Why? Who protected him? In Russia, dozens of Rybkas serve officials, and no one is outraged. Impunity has bred monsters on both sides of the ocean, and far beyond them. That is a separate topic, one I hope journalists and activists around the world will continue to expose. Because the truth, no matter how filthy, always leaks out. Today we know about the Kremlin's honey traps. We know about Epstein's island. We can already assemble the puzzle. This is a warning to everyone. The era of hidden vices may be coming to an end. They can no longer be concealed behind high fences. And for the Kremlin, this is a signal that its old weapon, kompromat, may ultimately turn against itself when its own crimes are not just exposed, but punished. The world of elites has proven far dirtier than we imagined, and we already imagined it to be bad. If Russian intelligence truly had a hand in this, then we have witnessed how the darkest possible methods, corruption, exploitation, and blackmail, were transformed into instruments of global politics, influencing the entire world. Write in the comments what you think about all this. I genuinely believe the Epstein story, the global elites, and everything surrounding them still demand serious reflection. I focused on the Russian angle because that's where my work is concentrated. But frankly, there is a great deal to think about on a global scale as well.